Ebla was one of the earliest kingdoms in Syria. Its remains constitute a tell located about 55 kilometers southwest of Aleppo near the village of Mardyke. Ebla was an important center throughout the 3rd millennium BC and in the first half of the 2nd millennium BC. Its discovery proved the Levant was a center of ancient, centralized civilization equal to Egypt and Mesopotamia, and ruled out the view that the latter two were the only important centers in the Near East during the early Bronze Age. Karl Moore described the First Eblate Kingdom as the first recorded world power. Starting as a small settlement in the early Bronze Age, Ebla developed into a trading empire and later into an expansionist power that imposed its hegemony over much of northern and eastern Syria. Its language, Eblate, is now considered the earliest attested Semitic language after Akkadian. Ebla was destroyed during the 23rd century BC. It was then rebuilt and was mentioned in the records of the 3rd dynasty of Ur. The second Ebla was a continuation of the first, ruled by a new royal dynasty. It was destroyed at the end of the 3rd millennium BC, which paved the way for the Amorite tribes to settle in the city, forming the 3rd Ebla. The Third Kingdom also flourished as a trade center. It became a subject and an ally of Yamhad until its final destruction by the Hittite king Mersi I in c. 1600 BC. Ebla maintained its prosperity through a vast trading network. Artifacts from Sumer, Cyprus, Egypt and as far as Afghanistan were recovered from the city's palaces. The political organization of Ebla had features different from the Sumerian model. Women enjoyed a special status and the queen had major influence in the state and religious affairs. The pantheon of gods was mainly North Semitic and included deities exclusive to Ebla. The city was excavated starting in 1964, and became famous for the Ebla tablets, an archive of about 20,000 cuneiform tablets found there, dated to around 2350 BC, written in both Sumerian and Eblate and using the cuneiform. The archive has allowed a better understanding of the Sumerian language and provided important information over the political organization and social customs of the mid-3rd millennium BC's Levant. History. A possible meaning of the word Ebla is white rock, referring to the limestone outcrop on which the city was built. Ebla was first settled around 3500 BC. Its growth was supported by many satellite agricultural settlements. The city benefited from its role as an entrepot of growing international trade, which probably began with an increased demand for wool in Sumer. Archaeologists designate this early habitation period Mardyke I. It ended around 3000 BC. Mardyke I is followed by the First and Second Kingdoms era between about 3000 and 2000 BC, designated Mardyke II. I.J. Gelb consider Ebla as part of the Kish civilization, which was a cultural entity of East Semitic-speaking populations that stretched from the center of Mesopotamia to the western Levant. First Kingdom. During the First Kingdom period between about 3000 and 2300 BC, Ebla was the most prominent kingdom among the Syrian states, especially during the second half of the 3rd millennium BC, which is known as the Age of the Archives, after the Ebla tablets. Early period. The early period between 3000 and 2400 BC is designated Mardyke II. General knowledge about the city's history prior to the written archives is obtained through excavations. The first stages of Mardyke II is identified with building CC, and structures that form a part of building G2, which was apparently a royal palace built c. 2700 BC. Toward the end of this period, a 100 Years' War with Mari started. Mari gained the upper hand through the actions of its king Saumu, who conquered many of Ebla's cities. In the mid-25th century BC, King Kundamu defeated Mari, but the state's power declined following his reign. Archive period. The Archive period, which is designated Mardyke IB1, lasted from c. 2400 BC until c. 2300 BC. The end of the period is known as the First Destruction, mainly referring to the destruction of the royal palace, and much of the Acropolis. During the Archive period, Ebla had political and military dominance over the other Syrian city-states of northern and eastern Syria, which are mentioned in the archives. Most of the tablets, which date from that period, are about economic matters but also include royal letters and diplomatic documents. The written archives do not date from before Igrish-Halem's reign, which saw Ebla paying tribute to Mari, and an extensive invasion of Eblate cities in the Middle Euphrates region led by the Mariate king Ebla. Ebla recovered under King Urkab-Damu in about 2340 BC, becoming prosperous and launching a successful counter-offensive against Mari. Urkab-Damu concluded a peace and trading treaty with Abbasal. It is one of the earliest recorded treaties in history. At its greatest extent, Ebla controlled an area roughly half the size of modern Syria, from Erzurum in the north to the area around Damascus in the south, and from Phoenicia and the coastal mountains in the west, to Hadu in the east. Half of kingdom was under the direct control of the king and was administered by governors. The rest consisted of vassal kingdoms paying tribute in, supplying military assistance to Ebla. One of the most important of these vassals was Armi, which is the city most often mentioned in the Ebla tablets. Ebla had more than 60 vassal kingdoms and city-states, including Hazuan, Burman, Emar, Halabichu and Salbatu. The vizier was the king's chief official. The holder of the office possessed great authority. The most powerful vizier was Ibrahim, who campaigned against Abbasal during the term of his predecessor Urukam. During the reign of Izar-Damu, Ebla continued the war against Mari, which defeated Ebla's ally Naga, blocking trade routes between Ebla and southern Mesopotamia via Upper Mesopotamia. Ebla conducted regular military campaigns against rebellious vassals, including several attacks on Armi, and a campaign against the southern city of Abal, close to Katna. In order to settle the war with Mari, Izar-Damu allied with Naga and Kish. The campaign was headed by the Eblate vizier Ibbi-Sipish, who led the combined armies to victory in a battle near Turka. The alliance also attacked Armi and occupied it, leaving Ibbi-Sipish's son Endi Malik as governor. Ebla suffered its first destruction a few years after the campaign, probably following Izar-Damu's death. First destruction of Ebla. The first destruction occurred c. 2300 BC. Palace G was burned, baking the clay tablets of the royal archives and preserving them. Many theories about the cause and the perpetrator have been posited. High dating hypothesis. Giovanni Pettinato supports an early dating for Ebla that would put the destruction at around 2500 BC. Pettinato, while preferring the date of 2500 BC, later accepted the event could have happened in 2400 BC. The scholar suggests the city was destroyed in 2400 BC by a Mesopotamian such as Enatum of Lagash, who boasted of taking tribute from Mari, or Lugal-Zagizi of Umma, who claimed to have reached the Mediterranean. Akkadian hypothesis. Both King Sargon of Akkad and his grandson Naram Singh claimed to have destroyed a town called Ebla. The discoverer of Ebla, Paolo Mattia, considers Sargon a more likely culprit. His view is supported by Trevor Bryce, but rejected by Michael Astor. Mari's revenge. According to Alfonso Archi and Maria Bigger, the destruction happened approximately 3 or 4 years after the Battle of Turka. Archi and Bigger say the destruction was caused by Mari in retaliation for its humiliating defeat at Turka. This view is supported by Mario Liverani. Archi says the Mariate king Iski Mari destroyed Ebla before ascending the throne of his city. Natural catastrophe. Astor says a natural catastrophe caused the blaze which ended the archive period. He says the destruction was limited to the area of the royal palace and there is no convincing evidence of looting. He dates the fire to c. 2290 BC. Second Kingdom. The Second Kingdom's period is designated Marduk IIB2, and spans the period between 2300 and 2000 BC. The Second Kingdom lasted until Ebla's second destruction, which occurred anytime between 2050 and 1950 BC, with the 2000 BC dating being a mere formal date. The Akkadians under Sargon and his descendant Naram-Sin invaded the northern borders of Ebla, aiming for the forests of the Amanus mountain. The intrusions were separated by roughly 90 years, and the areas attacked were not attached to Akkad. A new local dynasty ruled the Second Kingdom of Ebla, but there was continuity with its First Kingdom heritage. Ebla maintained its earliest features, including its architectural style and the sanctity of the First Kingdom's religious sites. A new royal palace was built in the lower town, and the transition from the archive period is marked only by the destruction of Palace G. The Second Kingdom was attested to in contemporaneous sources. In an inscription, Gudi of Lagash asked for cedars to be brought from Urshu in the mountains of Ebla, indicating Ebla's territory included Urshu north of Karchemish in modern-day Turkey. Texts that dates to the 7th year of Amarsin, a ruler of the Ur-3 Empire, mention a messenger of the Ensi of Ebla. The Second Kingdom was considered a vassal by the Ur-3 government, but the nature of the relation is unknown, and it included the payment of tribute. A formal recognition of Ur's overlordship appears to be a condition for the right of trade with that empire. The Second Kingdom disintegrated toward the end of the 21st century BC, and ended with the destruction of the city by fire. The reason for the destruction is not known. According to a store, it could have been the result of a Hurran invasion c. 2030 BC, led by the former Oblate vassal city of Akinkalis. The destruction of Ebla is mentioned in the fragmentary Hurro-Hittite legendary epic, Song of Release, discovered in 1983, which a store considers as describing the destruction of the Second Kingdom. In the epic, an Eblate assembly led by a man called Zazala prevents King Meki from showing mercy to prisoners from Ebla's former vassal Akinkalis, provoking the wrath of the Hurran-stormed god Teshubin, causing him to destroy the city. Third Kingdom. The Third Kingdom is designated Marduk III. It is divided into periods A and B. In period A, Ebla was quickly rebuilt as a planned city. The foundations covered the remains of Marduk II. New palaces and temples were built, and new fortifications were built in two circles, one for the Low City and one for the Acropolis. The city was laid out on regular lines and large public buildings were built. Further construction took place in period B. The first known king of the Third Kingdom is Ibitlim, who described himself as the Mechem of Ebla. A basalt votive statue bearing Ibitlim's inscription was discovered in 1968. This helped to identify the site of Tel Marduk with the ancient Kingdom Ebla. The name of the king is Amorite in the view of Petanato. It is therefore probable the inhabitants of Third Kingdom Ebla were predominantly Amorites, as were most of the inhabitants of Syria at that time. By the beginning of the 18th century BC, Ebla had become a vassal of Yamhad, an Amorite kingdom centered in Aleppo. Written records are not available for this period, but the city was still a vassal during Yaram-Lim III of Yamhad's reign. One of the known rulers of Ebla during this period was Amaya, who received gifts from the Egyptian pharaoh Hotapiba, indicating the continuing wide connections and importance of Ebla. The city was mentioned in tablets from the Yamhadite vassal city of Alalik in modern-day Turkey. An Eblate princess married a son of King Amatakum of Alalak, who belonged to a branch of the royal Yamhadite dynasty. Ebla was destroyed by the Hittite king Mursili I in about 1600 BC. Indilima was probably the last king of Ebla. A seal of his crown prince Miratiweri was discovered in the Western Palace Q. According to Arki, the Song of Release epic describes the destruction of the Third Kingdom and preserves older elements. Later periods Ebla never recovered from its third destruction. It was a small village in the phase designated Marduk IV, and was mentioned in the records of Alalik as a vassal to the Adrimi dynasty. Marduk V was a rural, early Iron Age settlement that grew in size during later periods. Further development occurred during Marduk V, which lasted until c. 60 AD. Marduk VII began in the 3rd century AD and lasted until the 7th century, after which the site was abandoned. Organization. City layout. Ebla consisted of a lower town and a raised acropolis in the center. During the First Kingdom, the city had an area of 56 hectares and was protected by mud brick fortifications. Ebla was divided into 4 districts, each with its own gate in the outer wall. The Acropolis included the King's Palace (G) and one of 2 temples in city dedicated to Karath. The lower city included the second temple of Kara in the southeast called Temple of the Rock. During the Second Kingdom, a royal palace was built in the lower town northwest of the Acropolis. In addition to Temple D, built over the destroyed Red Temple. During the Third Kingdom, Ebla was a large city nearly 60 hectares in size, and was protected by a fortified rampart, with double-chambered gates. The Acropolis was fortified and separated from the lower town. New Royal Palace E was built on the Acropolis, and a Temple of Ishtar was constructed over the former Red and D temples. The lower town was also divided into 4 districts. Palace P5 was used during Marduk IIIA, and replaced during Marduk IIIB by the Intermediate Palace. Other building included the Vizier Palace, the Western Palace, the Temple of Shamash, the Temple of Rasip and the Northern Palace. In the north of the lower town, a second temple for Ishtar was built, while the former Temple of the Rock was replaced by a Temple of Hadad. Beneath the Western Palace, natural caves constituted a royal burial ground. It includes many tombs such as the Tomb of the Lord of the Goats, and Tomb of the Princess. Government. The First Kingdom government consisted of the king and the Grand Vizier, who headed a council of elders and the administration. The central administration was located in the Acropolis. The queen shared the running of affairs of state with the king. The crown prince was involved in internal matters and the second prince was involved in foreign affairs. Most affairs, including military ones, were handled by the vizier and the administration, which consisted of 13 court dignitaries, each of whom controlled between 400 and 800 men, forming a bureaucracy with 11,700 people. Each of the 4 quarters of the lower city was governed by a chief inspector and many deputies. Smaller cities were governed by governors, each of whom was under the authority of the Grand Vizier. Women received salaries equal to those of men and could accede to important positions and head government agencies. The Second Kingdom was a monarchy, but little is known about it because of a lack of written records. The Third Kingdom was a city-state monarchy with reduced importance under the authority of Yamhud. Kings of Ebla. The Eblites worshipped dead kings as gods. For the First Kingdom monarchs, tablets listing offerings to kings mention 10 names, and another list mentions 33 kings. No kings are known from the Second Kingdom and all dates are estimates according to the Middle Chronology. People, language and culture. The First and Second Kingdoms Marduk II's periods shared the same culture. The Eblites of Marduk II were Semites. Giovanni Pettinato said the Eblate language was a West Semitic language. Gelb and others said it was an East Semitic dialect closer to the Akkadian language. Academic consensus considers Eblate an East Semitic language which exhibits both West Semitic and East Semitic features. Ebla held several religious and social festivals, including rituals for the succession of a new king, which normally lasted for several weeks. The Eblate calendars were based on a solar year divided into 12 months. 2 calendars were discovered, the Old Calendar, used during the reign of Igrishalem, and a new calendar, introduced by Vizier Ibbi Sipish. Many months were named in honor of deities. In the new calendar, Itubili was the first month of the year, and meant the month of the Lord. Each year was given a name instead of a number. The Eblites imported kungas from Naga, and used them to draw the carriages of royalty and high officials, as well as diplomatic gifts for allied cities. Society was less centered around the palace and the temple than in Mesopotamian kingdoms. The Eblate palace was designed around the courtyard, which was open toward the city, thus making the administration approachable. This contrasts with Mesopotamian palaces, which resembled citadels with narrow entrances and limited access to the external courtyard. Music played an important part in the society, and musicians were both locals, or hired from other cities such as Mari. Ebla also hired acrobats from Naga, but later reduced their number and kept him to train local Eblate acrobats. The Third Kingdom, the Mardike III population was predominantly Semitic Amorite. The Amorites were mentioned in the First Kingdom's tablets as neighbors and as rural subjects. They came to dominate Ebla after the destruction of the Second Kingdom and formed the bulk of its population. The city witnessed a great increase in construction, and many palaces, temples and fortifications were built. The Amorite Eblites worshipped many of the same deities as the Eblites of earlier periods, and maintained the sanctity of the Acropolis in the center of the city. The Third Kingdom's iconography and royal ideology were under the influence of Yamhad's culture. Kingship was received from the Yamhadite deities, instead of Ishtar of Ebla, which is evident by the Eblate seals of Indi Lima's period.